A breakfast booth, a corpse, and no clear suspect. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. Let's hear it. Where are you tuning in from tonight? Your messages make this mystery circle complete. Onward to the case. It was a Wednesday, which meant Fritz had decided to experiment with a buckwheat variation of waffles. I was halfway through my second when the bell rang. Not the downstairs buzzer, that would have been too routine, but the front doorbell. The kind of ring that meant someone had skipped protocol and was pressing their luck. I glanced at Wolfe, who was more focused on getting the golden crispness exactly proportional to the whipped butter, and I knew he wasn't budging until his breakfast concluded, case of arson or apocalypse. So I got the door. She was tallish, in her mid-30s, dressed like she had money but didn't need to prove it. Cream blouse, navy wool coat, sensible heels. She looked like the kind of woman who'd pronounce waffle like it was illegal. "Offense, miss?" "You're early for brunch and late for manners," I said. Her eyes flicked past me into the foyer. "Mr. Wolfe, I need to see Mr. Nero Wolfe. It's important." "They always say that," I told her. "What flavor of important are we talking? Missing heirloom, lost cat, cheating husband?" "My name is Eloise Debray," she said coolly. "I own the Debray Waffle House chain. I'm here because my partner was poisoned yesterday, possibly at one of our locations." I tilted my head. "You're saying someone got a side of homicide with their breakfast combo?" "She didn't." Smile. "And I think someone meant it to be me." That got her past the threshold. 10 minutes later, with Fritz discreetly clearing plates and Wolfe restored to his throne behind the desk, Eloise Debray sat composed on the red leather chair across from him. I took my usual position to the side, to notebook out, not for notes but to look like I was taking them. Wolfe shifted slightly but didn't look directly at her. That was how you knew he was listening. "Mr. Wolfe," she began, "my company, Debray Waffles, has 37 locations on the East Coast. I co-founded it with a man named Carl Weems 15 years ago. Carl and I have had disagreements lately, about expansion, about franchising, about integrity." I said, "I didn't realize Waffles had that many moral gray areas." She ignored me. "Yesterday morning, Carl met me for our quarterly strategy meeting at the new flagship location on 24th Street. He ordered his usual, pecan waffle with cranberry syrup. We'd barely started discussing the Q4 rollout when he collapsed, convulsed. He died on the floor before the paramedics arrived." Wolfe stirred. "What did the police say?" "Undetermined at first. Then late last night I received a call from the precinct. They found traces of oleandrin in his blood. A cardiac glycoside, poison, extracted from the oleander plant. They're investigating now, but slowly, too slowly." "And you think you were the intended target?" Wolfe said. "Yes," she said. "The flagship store has been mine from the beginning. Carl never liked the idea of opening in Manhattan. He agreed to meet me there under protest. I think the poison was meant for me." "Why?" "Because I've been trying to force him out," she said without blinking. "I hired a corporate lawyer to find leverage in our partnership agreement. I found out he'd been quietly licensing recipes without our board's approval. If I'd gone public with it, he would have been ousted, financially and reputationally." Wolfe narrowed his eyes. "And who else knew of this conflict?" Eloise exhaled. "That's the problem, too many people. The board, my assistant, his assistant, our new head of recipe development." "Head of recipe development?" I repeated. "Yes. His name is Leon Bramble, a food scientist. Brilliant, but theatrical. He just joined us from a rival breakfast brand. Carl hired him. I don't trust him." "Do you trust anyone?" I asked. She gave me a sidelong glance. "I trust truth, and I trust people who want to find it." Wolfe grunted. "Mr. Bray, you've come here because the police are not. Moving quickly, and you fear the killer is still free, perhaps even still close. You fear you were the intended victim and may yet be targeted again." "Is that it?" She nodded. "And I thought you—" Your reputation for discretion and detachment would be suited to this. Wolfe closed his eyes. I dislike food crimes. Unless the food is being misused, I added helpfully. He opened one eye and aimed it at me. Phooey, she leaned forward. Mr. Wolfe, I'll pay your fee, I'll double it. I want someone who won't be swayed by corporate politics or a puff piece in the Post. Someone who doesn't care about waffles. Wolfe's mouth twitched. I care about waffles, Mr. Bray, especially when they are properly made. She hesitated, then said, Then help me find who tried to kill me with one. There was silence for a beat. Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair once. That meant he was thinking. A man like Wolfe never rushes, even when someone is being picked off during breakfast hours. He opened his eyes. Very well, Mr. Goodwin will accompany you this afternoon to the 24th Street location. He will observe, ask questions, collect impressions. You will provide a list of all employees on site yesterday, the customers seated near you, and the current whereabouts of Mr. Bramble and both assistants. She nodded. I'll have my assistant email it immediately. Wolfe turned slightly toward me. Archie? Yes, sir? Do not eat anything there. I'll pack a sandwich. I don't usually start my afternoons by refusing waffles, but I'm a professional. So instead of grabbing a plate of Fritz's leftover griddle magic from the kitchen, I escorted Mr. Bray out the front door and into a cab, heading downtown toward her flagship empire of flour, syrup, and, possibly, homicide. The Debray Waffle House on 24th Street didn't look like a place you'd die in. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick walls, and pendant lighting that probably cost more than my weekly salary. The whole joint smelled like cinnamon, vanilla, and corporate branding. A teenage hostess with a clipboard recognized Eloise instantly and nodded us in. The place was half full, students, remote workers, and one guy in a suit flipping through what looked suspiciously like a term sheet. Eloise didn't bother with pleasantries. We were seated there, she said, pointing to a window booth with a black leather cushion and a small vase of lavender that had either been dead since Carl Weems hit the floor or was simply that kind of decorative choice. Carl sat on the inside. I was there. I slid into the booth and took a look around. From here you had a clear view of the front counter and part of the open kitchen. It didn't scream murder scene, but I knew Wolfe would want impressions and not just from my backside on pleather. Walk me through what happened, I said, pulling out my notebook. We were mid-conversation, she said. Carl had taken 2 bites. He was talking about quarterly margins when he suddenly clutched his chest. I thought it was indigestion, then he collapsed. Anyone else at the table? No. It was just us. Our assistants were in another booth 2 rows back. Neither of them touched the food. Who plated the dish? She motioned toward the open kitchen. That'll be Leon Bramble or his sous chef, Nora Lenz. Leon insists on overseeing presentation. At new locations, he's obsessive. Lucky you, I said, standing. Time for some introductions. Leon Bramble looked like someone who used the word gastronomic, unironically. Skinny, 30-ish, blonde streaks in his hair, and a beard trimmed with enough precision to suggest either vanity or neurosis. He wore a white double-breasted chef's jacket like it was armor. When I gave him my name and Wolfe's, he tensed, but not like a man caught red-handed, more like a guy who just realized the bad Yelp reviews might get legal follow-up. Detective? He asked. Worse, I said. Private investigator. You served Mr. Weems his final waffle. I plated it. Nora poured the syrup, he said, gesturing toward a thin brunette wiping down a prep station. We run everything fresh. That cranberry syrup is made in-house. We'd never use bottle junk, no preservatives. Just poison, I said. He didn't laugh. Leon pressed his lips together. Carl Weems was difficult. He criticized everything. Said the waffles were too artisanal. Told me to reduce cost per serving by using frozen batter. He even accused me of sabotaging his blood sugar levels. Did you? I asked. Of course not. I'm not a murderer. That's what they all say up until the cuffs, I said. Who else had access to the kitchen? Anyone on the floor staff. But the syrup was kept in the back fridge until service. Nora brought it out 5 minutes before plating. I jotted that down. Where's the syrup now? He turned and opened a narrow stainless steel fridge. The bottle was inside, a squat glass carafe with a pour spout. There were about 2 ounces left, dark red and viscous. Mind if I take that? I asked. For what? Testing or drinking. Depends how bored Wolfe gets. He handed it over like it was plutonium. Nora came over as I capped the bottle in a sample bag. I didn't poison anyone, she said. Without prompting. Her voice was thin, tight. I poured from a fresh batch. I tasted it that morning. We all did. Routine? No, Leon insisted. Said it builds palate trust. Did Carl say anything odd before he went down? She hesitated. Just that the syrup was surprisingly tart. He said he liked it. Then he choked. Back at the booth, Eloise was on the phone with someone, her lawyer from the sound of it. I tapped the table to interrupt her. Who's on your shortlist? I asked. She ended the call and folded her hands. Carl's assistant, Meryl Dent, had been with him for 6 years. She was fiercely loyal, but I never trusted her. Nora has only been here 3 months. And Leon, he thinks this is his show now that Carl's gone. He told me yesterday that creative control comes at a price. I raised an eyebrow. You think that was a confession or branding? Both. By the time we got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms, dictating orchid routines to Theodore. I deposited the syrup bottle on his desk and filled him in. He listened with his eyes closed. Mr. Bramble said the deceased found the syrup tart, he said finally. That's right. Not bitter? No. Tart. And he liked it. Wolfe nodded once, slowly. Interesting. You think the syrup was the delivery method? Possibly. Poison requires motive, means, and most importantly, an assumption. In this case, that Carl Weems would eat what he always ate, that Eloise would sit opposite him, that no one would notice a variance in taste. He opened his eyes. Archie, summon Saul and contact a toxicologist. I want the syrup analyzed. Then arrange interviews with the assistant, the rival chef, and Miss Dent. Tomorrow? No. Tonight. I will not have waffles made into a weapon under my roof. I said, technically they were weaponized under someone else's roof. He scowled. The metaphor stands. And just like that, Nero Wolfe had entered the case, not because he was curious, not because he was paid, but because someone had dared pervert breakfast. For a man whose sanctum begins with his stomach, that was practically sacrilege. And I had a feeling the killer, whoever they were, had already underestimated him. When Saul Panzer arrived an hour later, he brought with him the usual blend of competence, economy, and a hat that could have passed for a disguise if Saul ever needed one, which he didn't. Wolfe gave him the essentials in less time than it took Fritz to polish the last of the crystal in the kitchen, then dismissed him with the syrup bottle and instructions for a full toxicological breakdown. See if the poison is oleandrin, as the police claim, Wolfe said. And if so, how it was introduced. Syrup, waffle, garnish, or some insipid artistic drizzle. Saul nodded once, tucked the bottle into a padded case and left without asking about the fee. He knew Wolfe would remember. He always did. That left me to line up the interview parade. Miss Eloise Debray was still on the hook for coordinating appearances, which she managed through her ever-efficient assistant, whom I hadn't met yet. Wolfe, with his usual tact, wanted them staggered so he wouldn't have to endure more than one guest per sitting. The first to arrive, at precisely 6:15 p.m., was Meryl Dent, Carl Weems' personal assistant. She wore a grey pantsuit with black piping, no jewelry except for a narrow silver band on her right ring finger, and a look of perpetual disapproval that said she'd been on time to every meeting since 2003. I showed her into the office, where Wolfe sat in his oversized chair like a monument to sedentary indignation, fingers tented, eyes half-lidded. "Miss Dent," he said, nodding once, "you worked for Mr. Weems." I did. Describe him. She didn't blink. Brilliant, abrasive, demanding. He operated on instinct and feared delegation, which made him both effective and exhausting. I handled every document, meeting, and travel arrangement. I also taste-tested recipes until I had a gluten intolerance. Wolfe raised a brow. "Did you resent him?" "I admired him," she said, with just enough coolness to suggest the two weren't mutually exclusive. "You were present at the flagship location yesterday morning?" "Yes. Carl asked me to observe from a distance. He said Miss Debray might be staging a scene to sway the board." His words. "Did you notice anything peculiar during the meeting?" "I noticed she was unusually calm, and that she didn't touch her food." Wolfe's eyes flicked to me, then back to her. "Did she normally eat during meetings?" "Always," Merrill said. "She's a control eater. She arranges her bites like bullet points." That was good. I jotted it down. "Miss Dent," Wolfe said, "do you believe Miss Debray could have orchestrated his death?" "I believe Miss Debray had motive, resources, and a taste for vengeance dressed as civility. That earned her a long look from Wolfe." "Did you? Did I poison Carl?" Her tone didn't rise. "No, because despite everything, he was my best chance at staying relevant in a company being stripped of its founding values." When she left, Wolfe muttered something that sounded suspiciously like "ha." Coming from him, it was practically a standing ovation. The next to arrive was Leon Bramble. He made a production out of stepping into the office, adjusting his coat cuffs like he was about to be presented to a royal court, instead of questioned about murder in a house that smelled faintly of beef stock and orchids. "I'll warn you now," he said before Wolfe could speak. "I'm not a corporate stooge. I came to Debray because I believed in craft. Carl wanted bland mass-market output. Eloise wanted prestige. I wanted innovation." "Did innovation include poisoning your employer?" Wolfe asked, without looking up from his notebook. Bramble's mouth twitched. "No, I wanted to fire him. I didn't want him dead." "Why not?" Wolfe asked, blunt as ever. "Because dead men don't lose. Carl's legacy is now sealed in sympathy and scandal. If he were alive, I could have exposed him. I had proof he'd authorized a supplier switch to a synthetic maple blend without telling anyone. He was undercutting us behind the scenes." "Did you confront him?" "I scheduled a meeting for next week," Bramble said. "He cancelled it, of course, said he was busy reorganizing the board." Wolfe asked about the syrup, and Bramble gave him a detailed breakdown of its preparation, storage, and presentation. Nothing that contradicted what I'd heard before, but he added one new detail. The cranberry batch had been refrigerated in a secondary prep fridge the night before, not the usual walk-in. "Why?" I asked. "Because Nora, my Seuss, said the walk-in was too cold and ruined the syrup's consistency. She moved it. I didn't object." That earned a grunt from Wolfe. "Would Nora have had sole access to that fridge?" "For part of the morning. She opens before me." Wolfe waved him. "Off shortly after." "You may be clever, Mr. Bramble, but cleverness is no substitute for character." "I'm aware," Bramble replied with a dry smile. "That's why I always bring my own." The final visitor of the evening arrived just after 8. Nora Lentz. She was more nervous than the other two, and younger, 24 at most, with dark circles under her eyes that said she hadn't slept since Carl went down. She perched on the edge of the red leather chair like it might object to her presence. Wolfe, uncharacteristically gentle, waited while she fumbled with her coat and sat. "Miss Lentz, we've spoken to your colleagues. We know you handled the syrup that morning." I did, but I didn't poison anyone, I swear. You tasted it. Yes. At 7:30. It was fine. Tart, like always. Who had access after that? She hesitated. Anyone who came through the prep station. But I'm usually there. Usually, Wolfe echoed. I went out back around 9:15 to get the delivery manifest. The truck was late. How long were you gone? 5 minutes? Maybe 6. I left the syrup bottle on the prep shelf. I didn't think... No. Wolfe said, You didn't. She looked like she wanted to cry, but didn't. Why did you take this job? Leon said I'd learn from him. I'd been working hotel kitchens. I wanted something with creativity, meaning. And I liked the waffles, Wolfe leaned back. Do you trust Mr. Bramble? I don't know, he's brilliant, but also he plays favorites. Whose favorite are you? Not his, she said, eyes down. After she left, Wolfe didn't speak for a full minute. Then he reached for his beer and sipped, eyes shut. So? I asked. He opened his eyes. They're all lying, but only one of them lied the wrong way, I frowned. Translation? Carl Weems died from poison, likely oleandrin. It must have been introduced in the narrow window Miss Lenz mentioned. The question isn't how or when. It's who counted on that window, and why the poison didn't end up in Eloise Debray's dish. You still think she wasn't the target? She wasn't. I leaned back in my chair. Then who was? He didn't answer. Instead, he closed his eyes again, the way he does when something clicks and he wants to savor it. Outside, the city wound down. Inside the brownstone, the mystery was tightening, and for once it wasn't just about a murder. It was about a brand, a betrayal, and a bottle of syrup cold enough to kill. The next morning started with the usual trifecta. Fritz's perfect poached eggs, the smell of orchid fertilizer drifting faintly from the rear of the house, and Wolfe's complete unwillingness to acknowledge human civilization before 11 a.m. Unless, of course, someone had defiled a breakfast item, then he took it personally. At precisely 10:45, as I was finishing my second cup of coffee and resisting the temptation to sample a warm croissant that was technically meant for lunch, the phone rang. It was Saul. The syrup sample tested positive. For oleandrin, he said. Strong concentration, more than enough to be fatal. Source? I asked, scribbling notes in the margin of yesterday's logbook. Derived from the plant directly, not a synthetic variant. Crushed oleander leaves, steeped into a liquid base. It had a faint bitterness masked by the syrup's tartness. I whistled. That explains the surprisingly tart line. And another thing, Saul added, the poison was layered, not mixed throughout. It had settled slightly near the spout, so whoever poured from it first probably got a heavier dose. I thanked him, hung up and went straight to Wolfe, who was already settling in for his morning session with the Gazette and a glass of yellow tomato juice. I gave him the news, watching his expression, or lack of it, like a hawk. That confirms it, Wolfe said finally, setting down the juice without tasting it. The syrup was poisoned directly, not the waffles, which means Nora Lenz, despite her carelessness, is not the killer. Nor is Eloise Debray. Because she didn't pour the syrup? Exactly, someone tampered with that bottle while Nora was absent, intending for Carl Weems to be the first to use it. A risk, certainly, but not a random one. Okay, I said, pacing. So we've got motive and means. Carl was messing with the business behind the scenes, licensing things under the table, and playing favorites. That gives Bramble a reason, Dent a reason, and even Debray a reason if we're being cynical. Wolfe grunted. Cynicism is not deduction. What we need is to clarify intention. Who benefits most from Carl's absence, and whose plan hinged on that breakfast meeting proceeding exactly as it did? That's a narrow field. It is. Just then the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. Miss Debray again, this time with someone in tow. A man in his late 40s, charcoal suit, receding hairline, and the permanent look of someone who reads fine print for sport. He says he's your lawyer, I told Wolfe as they entered the office. I'm not, the man said smoothly. I'm hers. Alan Fairchild, General Counsel for Whodunit Waffle Enterprises. Miss Debray asked me to accompany her because the police are becoming clumsy. Wolfe didn't offer him a chair. Eloise sat without waiting. They questioned my assistant last night, she said. They think she may have spiked Carl's water glass. Did she? Wolfe asked. Of course not, Fairchild said. But Wolfe hadn't asked him. She didn't, Eloise said. But the police are chasing noise. I need you to solve this before the board turns it into a coup. Wolfe's eyes flicked to Fairchild. Miss Debray is paying for my services. If you're here to filter or obscure, leave. Fairchild gave a slight bow. Understood, Wolfe gestured toward me. Mr. Goodwin has determined, through analysis and testimony, that the poison was introduced into the syrup shortly before service. That narrows our suspect list considerably. I still think it was Leon, Eloise said. He knew our seating, he knew Carl always asked for extra syrup, and he had motive. Wolfe shook his head. He had motive, yes, but he also had a meeting scheduled next week to confront Carl and leverage his position. If he wanted Carl dead, he would have done so after the meeting failed, not before. So, who does that leave? Fairchild asked. Someone who wanted Carl dead and needed that death to seem sudden, isolated, and ideally mistaken. I glanced up. Mistaken? Wolfe nodded. A killer hoping Eloise would be the one to die, would poison the whole bottle. But the poison settled. The killer counted on Carl being served first. That's precision, that's planning. Eloise stiffened. You mean the killer knew Carl would take the first pour? Exactly. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind Wolfe enjoys, one where all the pieces are floating in the air, just waiting for gravity to arrange them. Then I snapped my fingers. Merrill Dent. Wolfe's lips twitched. Indeed. Wait, Eloise said. You think Merrill poisoned him? But she adored Carl. She practically lived for him. She also knew his habits, Wolfe said. And yours. She sat far enough away not to be observed too closely, and she knew in all likelihood that if she poured the syrup herself, she'd be noticed. But if the syrup was already compromised, she could let the bottle do the work. I picked it up from there. She had access to the prep area during Nora's absence. She could have slipped in, tampered with the bottle, and walked out unnoticed. It was a 5-minute window. Eloise looked stunned. But why? What could she gain? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. What every clever assistant eventually wants: control. Carl never gave her credit, I added. But she saw everything. Maybe she thought with him out of the way she could help run the show. Eloise stood. I need to confront her. No, Wolfe said sharply. That would be foolish. She will lie, deny, and vanish. No, she must come to us. I raised a brow. How do we do that? Wolfe looked at me. We offer her what she thinks she's earned. It took some fast work. Eloise had to put out a press release, drafted by Fairchild, announcing that due to the tragic passing of Mr. Weems, the board would be temporarily elevating key staff to ensure stability and continuity. The statement named no names, but a second internal memo leaked intentionally suggested that Merrill Dent would be stepping in to assist with interim strategy decisions pending board review. It hit the wires by early afternoon. By 5 p.m., Merrill Dent was at our door. She didn't wait for Fritz to show her in. She stormed into the office like she'd been summoned for a coronation and got handed a subpoena instead. Who the hell leaked that memo? She demanded. I haven't even been told. You came because you think the throne is being offered, Wolfe said. It is not. Sit down, Miss Dent. She froze. What is this? This is where we end the charade. You killed Carl Weems. Her mouth opened, then closed. You're insane. No, Wolfe said. Just observant. I stepped forward. You knew he'd be first to pour. You knew Eloise wouldn't touch her food until he'd started talking. You slipped into the prep area while Nora was out back, added the oleander extract to the syrup bottle, shook it just enough to blend, and walked out. The poison settled. He took the brunt. You counted on chaos, and you got it. That's ridiculous, is it? Wolfe asked. Or is it simply inconvenient? Merrill Dent looked from Wolfe to me to Eloise, whose arms were now folded like a CEO delivering a termination speech. You can't prove it. I don't have to, Wolfe said. But the lab report does. Your fingerprints were found on the cap of the syrup bottle, over Nora's and no one else's. You were the last to touch it. That was a fib. Saul hadn't reported back yet, but Wolfe was gambling, and bluffing was a card he rarely had, to play more than once. Merrill sank back into the chair, eyes glassy. He was going to replace me, she said, with someone from Chicago. After everything I did, after years of loyalty, he didn't even tell me. He told Leon. He said I was too institutional. Eloise's voice was cold. So you murdered him. I freed this company, Merrill snapped. Wolfe shook his head. You poisoned a man with syrup. I'd call that desecration. She didn't speak again. I called Kramer, and by 6:30 Merrill was in cuffs and Wolfe had returned to his orchids. The brownstone was calm again. Dinner that night was pan-seared duck breast with orange glaze. Wolfe raised his fork thoughtfully. I abhor syrup now, he said. I poured my coffee. Then justice really was served. The morning after Merrill Dent's arrest, the brownstone was eerily quiet. Fritz, out of solidarity with Wolfe's newfound distaste for syrup, had served French omelettes with sautéed chanterelles, and not a drop of anything that required pouring from a bottle. Wolfe, for his part, consumed his breakfast with mechanical indifference, and I could tell something was still under his skin. Not the crime itself, but the motive. Wolfe is rarely unsettled once he's cracked a case. He doesn't gloat, doesn't bask. He moves on, but this time there was a hitch, something that hadn't resolved to his satisfaction. You're brooding, I told him, sliding into the red armchair across from his desk after breakfast. I do not brood, Archie, I contemplate. Same thing, only one comes with a soundtrack. He ignored that. Miss Dent's actions, though methodical, do not match her profile. I raised a brow. She poisoned her boss with enough precision to beat a police investigation. That seems pretty on brand for a disillusioned assistant, Wolfe grunted. She is intelligent, efficient, but emotional. Her motive was too thin. She snapped, yes, but not in a vacuum. You think she had help? No. I think she had. A trigger. That coming from Wolfe meant we were heading back into the case whether we wanted to or not. And, as luck or design would have it, that afternoon brought a visit from a returning character I hadn't expected. Leon Bramble. He arrived unannounced, with less swagger and more nerves than he'd shown in our previous encounter. This time, his beard looked less curated and more chewed. I know you caught her, he said as I let him into the office, but I think you've missed something. Wolfe didn't look up from his book. If this is about creative control or your corporate status, it's not. It's about the recipe log. That got Wolfe's attention. Leon sat. Every batch of syrup we make has a prep record for quality control, ingredients, ratios, even batch temperature. Carl insisted on it. Said if we were going to sell artisan waffles, we'd better have artisan accountability. I smirked. Catchy. Leon ignored me. I checked the logs for that day. The cranberry syrup batch, the one Nora poured from, was prepped. The night before logged by me, but there's a second entry early the next morning, a note that the batch was rebalanced with additional sweetener. And, Wolfe asked, I didn't make that entry, and neither did Nora, which means someone, else tampered with the syrup and tried to cover their tracks by writing it in like a standard update. Who had access to the log? I asked. Just the culinary staff, Leon said. That's me, Nora, and Carl. That made me sit up straighter. Carl updated the syrup batch. Not likely. Carl never touched the logs. He thought clipboards were beneath him. Wolfe folded his hands. Miss Dent? Leon hesitated. She shouldn't have had access. But if she was in the kitchen, she was, Wolfe said. During Nora's absence just before service, Leon exhaled. Then, that entry proves she didn't just tamper with the syrup. She tried to hide it. But here's the thing. I asked Ite to check the timestamps on the digital log copy. The physical sheet said the entry was made at 6:45 a.m., but the digital file was last modified at 9:18. Wolfe's eyes opened. Exactly when Nora stepped out. Leon nodded. She used Nora's terminal to make it look routine. After he left, Wolfe remained very still. You look like a man who just solved a riddle and doesn't like the answer, I said. She acted alone, Wolfe said, not looking at me. But the crime wasn't hers originally. That stopped me. Explain. Wolfe leaned forward. Miss Dent had motive, certainly, but she was pushed. She was manipulated. Someone laid the groundwork, moved the bottle, adjusted the seating plan, provided just enough suggestion to ignite her. You think someone baited her into murder? Precisely. It was audacious, but it fit. Wolfe stood, miracle of miracles, and stepped to the Globe bar to pour a glass of sherry. He rarely drinks before dinner. When he does, something's simmering. There is one person, he said slowly, who had access to every conversation, every memo, every calendar entry. Who knew Merrill's insecurities, Carl's routines, Eloise's habits? Who scheduled the meeting, the seating, the press follow-ups? It hit me like a sledgehammer made of linen stationery. Eloise's assistant, I said. We never met her, just heard about her. Because she preferred to work unseen, Wolfe said. But her fingerprints are on everything. I nodded. She'd be the one coordinating access. Probably typed the internal memo that got Merrill riled up in the first place. Find her, Wolfe said, finishing his sherry. Now. It wasn't hard. Her name was Simone Varn, and she worked from the corporate office uptown. I called, posed as a client requesting a catering quote, and got her on the phone within 3 minutes. This is Miss Varn, came a cool, efficient voice. I laid it out. Miss Varn, we're investigating the death of Carl Weems. We know you booked the meeting, approved the seating, and relayed internal memos. What we don't know is why you didn't show up when your boss nearly died from breakfast. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for me to know she wasn't surprised. I wasn't required to attend, she said finally. No, I said. But you did everything to make sure someone else did. Another pause. Then, do you have a warrant? We don't need one. We have a confession. Just not yours. Click. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was already issuing orders. He had Saul on her tail and a subpoena request prepped for the company's IT department. It's elegant, Wolfe said. She knew Miss Dent's pride. She knew Carl's scheduling habits. She poisoned nothing but arranged everything. And what was her motive? Power, Wolfe said. The purest kind, through puppetry. The next morning, Simone Varn was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, manipulation of digital records, and obstruction. She deleted half a dozen emails that hinted at her orchestration, but the recovery logs told the story. She hadn't touched the syrup, but she'd placed the bottle, rescheduled the meeting, and whispered the right words to the right person. Merrill Dent had delivered the fatal act, but Simone Varn had written the script. That night, as rain whispered against the windows and Fritz served a cassoulet so good I briefly forgot about murder altogether, Wolfe finally exhaled. It is not always the one who holds the knife who commits the crime. he said. I raised a glass. Sometimes it's the one who places the knife on the table. He gave a grudging nod. Miss Varn, he said, is a woman of precision. You mean evil. I mean deliberate. There is a difference. Not one the DA will care about. No, Wolfe said, nor should they. And that, as far as Wolfe was concerned, was the true end of the Waffle House whodunit. The press couldn't get enough of it. It was the kind of story that practically syruped itself across the headlines, sweetened with murder, corporate, betrayal served hot, and my personal favorite, courtesy of the Daily News, Waffle whodunit unfolds in Manhattan. I didn't blame them. The combination of breakfast, ambition, and a double-dealing assistant was too tempting for the ink slingers to resist. But the brownstone remained unchanged. Wolfe didn't read past the editorial page, and he never watched the evening news. His opinion of television was unprintable in most states. Still, the case's notoriety did what notoriety always does. It brought more trouble. It started the morning after Simone Varn's arrest. Wolfe and I were in the office. He was polishing off his second bottle of beer and beginning a monologue on the decline of civility in midtown dining when Fritz poked his head in, an event rare enough to qualify as a minor eclipse. "There is a man here to see Mr. Wolfe," he said, frowning. "Name?" Wolfe asked without enthusiasm. "He says Mr. Wolfe won't know him, but that the matter is urgent and related to the Waffle case." That got Wolfe's attention. "Barely. Show him in," Wolfe said after a moment. Fritz disappeared, and a minute later, our mystery visitor appeared. He was in his early 40s, stocky, with a businessman's tan, and the kind of haircut you get when you stop caring what anyone thinks. He wore a brown corduroy jacket, grey slacks, and a cautious look that didn't improve much when he saw Wolfe. "My name is Malcolm Sloane," he said. "I'm the Regional Supply Chain Director for Maplecore, Inc." Wolfe inclined his head, slightly. "I do not buy syrup." "No," Sloane said, "but your investigation has affected my business." Wolfe didn't respond, which I knew meant elaborate or get out. Sloane cleared his throat. "We're the primary distributor of natural sweeteners to Debray Waffle Enterprises. 3 days ago, our legal department received an anonymous tip that we were involved indirectly in the death of Carl Weems. The claim? That one of our drivers delivered the contaminated syrup batch." I sat forward. "That's not what happened." "I know," Sloane said. "I've read the reports. I also know the tampered syrup was made in-house, not delivered. But the accusation's doing damage. We've had 2 clients suspend contracts. My CEO is livid, and I want to know who's pushing this angle and why." Wolfe still hadn't moved. "You think it's retaliation?" I asked. Sloane nodded. "Someone wants Maplecore tied to the scandal. Legally or publicly, it doesn't matter. The damage is already underway." Wolfe tapped his fingers once. "Who benefits from undermining Maplecore?" "That's the question," Sloane said. "If this gets out, we lose shelf space in 4 supermarket chains. Our competitor, SilverSweet, has been trying to push into that territory for years." "SilverSweet," Wolfe said. "Based in Chicago?" Yes, I shot Wolfe a look. Wasn't Merrill Dent about to be replaced by someone from Chicago? Wolfe's eyelids lowered. "Indeed." Sloane blinked. "You think there's a connection?" "Possibly." Wolfe said, "Mr. Sloane, would you be willing to provide us with your delivery records for the past month, specifically those pertaining to the 24th Street Debray location?" "If it helps," Sloane said, "but I'm telling you, none of our product was involved." "I know," Wolfe said, "but someone wants it to seem otherwise, and I want to know who." When Sloane left, Wolfe rolled back from his desk and shut his eyes. "This began as a petty vendetta," he said, "a personal slight. But it has turned into what? A campaign." I didn't like the sound of that. Campaigns meant planning, resources, time. This wasn't just a jealous assistant trying to make a point. This was broader. Wolfe waved toward the phone. "Call Saul. Tell him to investigate Simone Varn's connections in Chicago. Friends, schools, work history, particularly any links to Silver Sweet or any other competitor of Maplecore. Think she was a plant? Possibly. Or simply opportunistic. She may have used Merrill Dent to kill Weems and used the resulting panic to tarnish Maplecore. 2 birds, 1 poisoned batch." That afternoon, Saul reported back. Simone Varn had in fact lived in Chicago 6 years ago, worked briefly as an executive scheduler for a brand consulting firm, one that handled marketing for Silver Sweet. No smoking gun, but enough of a barrel to smell powder. She left abruptly, Saul said. No forwarding address, no lawsuit. But the company VP she reported to, a guy named Lenko Rule, relocated to New York around the same time. "Guess where he works now?" "Don't tell me," I said. "Debray Waffles." "VP of Strategic Expansion," Saul said. "Hired 8 months ago. And guess who he personally recruited?" Simone Varn. It fit too well to be coincidence. Wolfe, of course, was already steps ahead. "Lenko Rule," he muttered. "A man in a position to influence both Carl Weems and the assistant who replaced him. One pushes the expansion, the other pushes the internal sabotage. You think Rule set the whole thing in motion?" "No," Wolfe said. "He merely permitted it, perhaps even suggested it, the kind of man who doesn't light fires but leaves the matches visible." "So what now?" "We confront him," Wolfe said. "But not yet. First we bait the trap." That meant another memo. This one, unsigned, was fed to the board via an anonymous drop, a warning that Simone Varn's actions weren't just personal. They were part of a pattern of disloyalty and possible industrial sabotage. It was enough to stir the pot without setting it boiling. Wolfe wanted reaction, not panic. By the following evening, Rule made his move. He appeared at the brownstone without appointment, eyes blazing and voice brittle with affected civility. "This stunt," he said, standing in the office doorway, "is defamation." "Then sue," Wolfe said without looking up. "I came to warn you," Rule continued, "that dragging a dead man's reputation through the mud won't help your client." "You misunderstand," Wolfe said calmly. "It is the living I find dangerous," I stepped in. "You recruited Simone Varn. You knew she'd worked for your former employer. You had a problem. Carl Weems opposed your expansion plans. So you brought in someone who could destabilize the leadership from the inside. Absurd. She orchestrated a murder using a loyalist," Wolfe said, "then tried to pin it on a supplier, one that just so happens to be Silver Sweet's chief rival. You have no proof. I have patterns, timelines, and now your reaction." Wolfe leaned back. "The police will come to their own conclusions, but you won't get another chance to run this game. Not in New York." Rule's face twitched. "You think this ends you?" "No," Wolfe said, but it ends you." And with that, Rule left, without another word. By the weekend, Debray's board announced an internal audit. Rule resigned quietly. Simone Varn was formally charged as a co-conspirator. Merrill Dent, facing the reality of manipulation and betrayal, pled guilty to manslaughter. It was over. On Sunday, Fritz dared to serve a waffle again. Wolfe looked at it for a long moment before cutting in. He took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "Adequate," he declared. "That's the highest praise you've given food all week," I said. Wolfe didn't look up. "Murder," he said, "is most foul when it spoils appetite." I lifted my coffee. "To justice." "No," Wolfe said, "to breakfast." By Monday morning, the Debray case had officially shifted from scandal to post-mortem. Simone Varn's arrest had made the second page of the Times, pushed aside by a Senate ethics probe and a celebrity chef caught laundering caviar. But in the brownstone there was no forgetting. Wolfe had returned to his routines, orchids in the morning, reading in the afternoon, and what he called digestive silence during meals. But I could tell he wasn't through with it. Neither was I. There was a thread still hanging, and threads, as Wolfe had drilled into me more than once, either get pulled or strangle someone later. So when Saul called around 10 with a tone of voice that sounded like he'd stepped on something important, I put him through directly. I took a look at Lenko Rule's email records, Saul said. Back-channel stuff from his personal laptop. You were right, he didn't light the fire, but he absolutely supplied the kerosene. Details, Wolfe grunted. A month before Carl Weems's death, Rule exchanged several encrypted messages with someone at Silver Suite using a proxy server. One thread referenced logistical openings at Debray and a redundant executive structure. It's dry language, but it reads like a setup. Then, 2 weeks later, he schedules an internal review with Carl and Simone. And boom, we're off to the races. I looked at Wolfe. His fingers had paused on the armrest. You said he permitted it, I reminded him. Looks like he commissioned it, Saul continued. There's more, a wire transfer, $35,000 to a consulting firm registered to Simone Varn's cousin. Looks clean on paper, but it's not. Find the cousin, Wolfe said. Find the money trail. You got it. He hung up and Wolfe sat still for a long moment. That explains Simone's motive, I said. She didn't act for personal gain. Not entirely. She acted for profit and for leverage. She acted, Wolfe corrected, because Rule made her believe she had power. That's all it takes? For some, he said. Yes. For others, it takes waffles. He stood, a rare occurrence before noon, and paced once behind. His desk. Archie, prepare the office. I want all involved parties summoned. Eloise Debray, Leon Bramble, Nora Lenz, Fairchild if he's willing, and Mr. Rule. All at once? Yes. You're planning the reveal. I am, I smiled. Then I'll notify Fritz to make extra coffee. We're going to need it. They arrived just past 4. Wolfe insisted on the meeting being scheduled late enough that no one could claim calendar conflicts, but early enough that it didn't delay dinner. That was the line he always drew. Justice must be served, just not after 6:30. Eloise Debray was the first in. She wore navy again, suit this time, no coat, and sat with the calm of someone who'd learned not to show her hand. Bramble followed, with slightly less flair than usual, and Nora Lenz trailed behind him, visibly nervous. Alan Fairchild entered quietly and remained standing. Then came Rule, last, deliberate and smirking like a man who'd beaten the odds. Before and planned to do it again. Wolfe waited until they were all seated before speaking. This will not take long, he began. You are here because you have been participants, willing or not, in a sequence of events that culminated in the death of Carl Weems, the arrest of 2 of your colleagues, and the exposure of a corporate deception. He turned his gaze on Rule. Mr. Rule, I will be brief. You arranged for Simone Varn's hiring at Debray despite her known conflicts of interest, and you provided her with cover as she manipulated internal communication, structure, and access to sensitive locations. You knew of her proximity to Merrill. Dent, you used her as a lever. Rule gave a thin smile. These are interesting theories. No, Wolfe said. They are certainties. He reached for the folder I'd placed on his desk earlier and handed it to Fairchild. In that folder, Wolfe said, you will find digital communication between Mr. Rule and a Silver Suite proxy, as well as a record of a wire transfer to a holding account connected to Miss Varn's cousin, all neatly documented. Fairchild opened it, read 2 pages, and turned to Eloise. This is bad. Rule's smirk faltered. These are circumstantial. No, Wolfe said. They are strategic and damning. You arranged for Carl Weems to be confronted by the woman most likely to resent him. You knew Simone Varn would facilitate access. You allowed the murder to happen, not for vengeance, but for market control. Eloise's voice was sharp. You tried to poison my company. And you succeeded, Wolfe said. Wolfe. Briefly. Maplecore suffered losses. Your internal hierarchy collapsed. But the scheme failed in one respect. Miss Dent wasn't subtle. Rule looked around the room, saw the eyes on him. You have no proof I gave the order. No. Wolfe said, only the outcome, but the board will have proof enough when they see that file, and the district attorney will consider the motive, industrial sabotage, sufficient for conspiracy charges. Rule stood. You'll regret this. Unlikely, Wolfe said. Rule left without another word. Afterward, Eloise lingered. You've done more than solve a murder, she said. You've gutted a conspiracy. I dislike disorder, Wolfe said. And betrayal? I abhor it. She smiled faintly. Perhaps I should offer you a seat on the board. Wolfe made a sound somewhere between a grunt and a prayer for divine patience. I do not serve, he said. I rule. That night the brownstone was unusually still. Wolfe didn't speak during dinner, but I could tell from the way he savored Fritz's ricotta gnocchi that the balance had been restored. I poured a brandy for both of us afterward and sat across from him. You ever think about how fragile trust is? I asked. He sipped. Only when it is misused. This whole thing started because a woman felt overlooked. Then another saw opportunity. Then a man played both of them to destroy a rival. Wolfe didn't answer immediately. Then, there are only three motivations in any human enterprise: gain, fear, and ego. The tragedy comes when one masks itself as another. Which was this? Ego, he said, disguised as ambition. We sat in silence for a while, then he added, also, I will not eat waffles for 6 months. Understood. The following week in the brownstone had the kind of stillness Wolfe thrives on. The orchids got his full attention. The kitchen resumed its sacred rhythms under Fritz's vigilant eye, and I managed to catch up on 6 neglected reports, 4 crossword puzzles, and a mystery novel that couldn't hold a candle to the case we'd just closed. Wolfe had turned the page, figuratively, and literally, but I hadn't, because something about Simone Vaughn still bugged me. It wasn't that she'd manipulated Merrill Dent into committing murder. That much we'd unpacked, documented, and watched get cuffed. It wasn't even her eerie calm as she'd been escorted out by the authorities. What stuck in my craw was the timing, the way she had orchestrated the perfect moment, right down to the bottle being exactly where it needed to be. Wolfe claimed it was brilliance. But I've dealt with brilliance before. Simone's plan had been more than clever. It had been inside. Like she'd had help. So I did what Wolfe never does. I backtracked. Quietly. On Thursday, I paid a visit to the 24th Street Debray location, acting under the guise of a routine wrap-up. The place looked normal, whatever normal meant after. Someone died in a booth, and the whole business teetered on collapse. The air still carried a trace of cinnamon and polish, but the staff moved slower now, like they'd all aged a little. I flagged down Nora Lenz at the prep counter. Hey, I said, keeping it light. Just checking in. Loose ends. She nodded, tying her apron tighter. I figured. You still running the syrup station? No, she said. Leon's taken over that again. He says it's a trust issue. Can't imagine why, I said. She almost smiled. You want to see the logbook? Actually, yeah. She led me to the kitchen office, a closet-sized nook with a desk and a metal file cabinet. The prep logs were stacked in binders, color-coded, tabbed, obsessively neat. This is the one from the week of the incident, she said, handing it to me. We switched to digital after... Well, I flipped through it. Nothing jumped out, just dates, batches, ingredient codes. But near the back, something gave me pause. A sticky note, faded and curling at the edge, tucked between the pages. Don't forget. Use fridge number 2. L. I held it up. Leon? Nora shrugged. I assume so. He's the only one who writes notes like that. But you didn't use fridge number 2 that day, I said. You said you left the bottle on the prep shelf, not in the fridge. Her face stiffened. Right. Why? The change. She hesitated. I thought it would be faster to just leave it out. We were behind that morning. I nodded, but my radar was pinging. Back at the brownstone, I laid the note on Wolfe's desk. Leon wrote this? I asked. Wolfe didn't even touch it. You're certain, according to Nora, but it doesn't match his usual control style. He runs a tight kitchen. Why would he leave a handwritten note for a single-use instruction? And why would Nora disregard it? He finally looked at the paper. Because it wasn't from Leon. Exactly, I said. Someone wanted the syrup moved to a different fridge. Fridge number 2 is less cold. Nora said as much, which would affect viscosity. And settling, Wolfe added. The poison sank. That's how Weems got the full dose. If it had been in the walk-in, it might have stayed suspended. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Meaning the killer anticipated the chemistry and trusted Nora to leave it on the shelf. She thought she was helping. No, Wolfe murmured. She was being helped. A silence settled between us, the kind that means something nasty just swam to the surface. Archie, Wolfe said, call Miss Debray, ask her to return, and then summon Mr. Bramble. You think Leon planted the note? I think, Wolfe said, he provided the suggestion without ever touching the syrup. Eloise arrived an hour later, composed but clearly on edge. If this is about another scandal, she said as I took her coat, I swear I'll close the entire chain and start selling funeral urns instead. No scandal, I said. Just a footnote. She stepped into the office to find Leon Bramble already seated, looking impatient but not alarmed. Wolfe gestured to the paper note on his desk. Do you recognize this? He asked Bramble. Leon glanced at it. No. Nora says you wrote it. He frowned. I don't recall. I write dozens of notes every week. This one refers to fridge number 2, a deviation. It might have been part of a batch instruction. No, Wolfe said. It was a placement cue, not a recipe adjustment. It guided where the syrup was stored before service. A subtle difference, but a critical one. Leon folded his arms. You're saying I moved the syrup? No, Wolfe said. You moved the idea into Nora's mind. You placed that note knowing she'd follow it, and knowing she'd then do the opposite to save time. That's a leap, Bramble said. Wolfe nodded. So was yours. He turned to Eloise. Miss Debray, you trusted Mr. Bramble because he opposed Carl Weems. But Leon is not a revolutionary. He's a tactician. Carl stood in his way. Merrill Dent was a useful tool. Simone Varn was an opportunistic wildcard. But Leon orchestrated the details. He knew Carl's habits, Nora's shortcuts, Merrill's bitterness. And me? Eloise asked, voice tight. You, Wolfe said gently, were the alibi. She looked at Bramble. You told me Merrill was unstable, that Simone was dangerous. I told you the truth, he said evenly. No, I said. You told enough truth, and you kept your hands clean. Bramble didn't deny it. He just sat back, eyes cool. I never touched the syrup, he said. You have no proof I wrote that note. I don't need proof, Wolfe said. I have patterns and motives, and a mind that doesn't rely on fingerprints. Eloise stood. I'll deal with this. You will, Wolfe said. He's your employee. She turned to Bramble. You're done. He rose, smoothing his jacket. This won't stick. No, Wolfe said. But it will stain. That night, as rain swept against the windows and the city trudged through its 5th consecutive scandal in as many days, Wolfe settled into his chair with the contentment of a man who'd untied the final knot. You knew, I said. I suspected, Wolfe replied. But it required confirmation. The note was the final thread. Why'd he do it? Bramble. He already had control. Not enough, Wolfe said. He didn't just want power. He wanted a story. A narrative where he was the survivor, the innovator, the misunderstood genius stepping in after chaos. And he got it. For a time. I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. "Waffles are dangerous." Wolfe grunted. "No," he said. "People are dangerous. Waffles are merely the bait." By the time Section 9 rolled around, figuratively and otherwise, the dust on the Waffle House whodunit had mostly settled. Simone Vaughn was officially charged with conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and corporate espionage. Merrill Dent's plea had gone through quietly, and her sentencing was set for the end of the month. Lenko Rule had resigned for personal reasons, which everyone interpreted as to avoid subpoenas, and Leon Bramble had been removed from his position with the kind of internal HR memo that's all civility and no illusion. But that didn't mean the case was truly over. Not in Wolfe's estimation. "You'll forgive me if I don't celebrate," he muttered that Tuesday afternoon, as Fritz cleared away the remains of a roast pigeon lunch so perfect it might have brought a lesser man to tears. I sat across from him with a cup of coffee and the latest New Yorker unopened in my lap. We nailed the instigator, the manipulator, the trigger woman, and the financier, I pointed out. Short of arresting the waffle iron, I think we're done. Wolfe didn't look up. "No, we are concluded but not finished," I sighed. "That sounds like something you say when you're about to ruin my afternoon," he grunted, which I took as confirmation. "What now?" Wolfe finally raised his eyes. "Miss Debray has requested our presence." I blinked. "Our?" "Yes," he said flatly. "Yours physically, mine intellectually. She wants us to attend a closed executive session of her board." "Why?" "She intends to restructure the company. She believes our presence will discourage interference. She wants us to be a human lie detector. She wants to perform a controlled demolition with witnesses," Wolfe said, "and a safety net." I stood. "I suppose this means I'm changing into something that doesn't have coffee stains." The Debray corporate office was slick in the way all modern food enterprises are now. Clean lines, matte finishes, artfully industrial fixtures. The only smell was cold air and ambition. The boardroom had a 12-seat oak table, one potted ficus, and a soundproof door that probably cost more than our entire living room furniture combined. Eloise Debray stood at the head, back straight, expression unreadable. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, shaking my hand. "Mr. Wolfe, thank you." Wolfe, patched in via speakerphone, rumbled his response. "Proceed, Miss Debray." The board was already seated, 6 of them evenly split between the cautious, the curious, and the clearly annoyed. Among them was Alan Fairchild, who nodded to me with something between gratitude and exhaustion. Eloise began without ceremony. "You are all aware of the circumstances surrounding Mr. Weems's death and the fallout that followed. You are less aware of the underlying disease, one that nearly hollowed out this company from within." She walked once around the table, slow and measured. "I brought Mr. Wolfe and Mr. Goodwin here today, not only because they exposed that rot, but because I want transparency to be the new currency at this table." That got a few raised eyebrows. One man in a grey vest leaned back, as if preparing for a long, unpleasant performance. The sabotage orchestrated by Simone Vaughn was not merely a personnel issue. It was a deliberate attempt to destabilize leadership, fracture internal trust, and influence shareholder confidence. "And it nearly worked," she paused. "But it didn't." "Because we caught the conspirators," someone said from the far end. A woman in her 50s with platinum hair and a tone that said she wasn't buying the victory lap. "No," Eloise said, "because we hired the right detective, and because we still have time to course correct." She turned toward the speakerphone. "Mr. Wolfe, your summary, if you please." Wolfe didn't hesitate. Miss Debray's enemies were numerous, but their strategies were identical: indirect action, exploitation of routines, and manipulation of perception. The murder of Carl Weems was not a crime of passion, but of positioning. Each move, each whisper, was designed to shift balance without triggering alarm. That such a campaign could succeed at all is a failure of internal transparency, not just loyalty. A heavy silence followed. Then, "So what do you propose?" asked a voice that hadn't spoken yet. An older man with tortoiseshell glasses, and the kind of voice that had been speaking on panels since the 90s. Eloise answered before Wolfe could. "I propose a full audit, not just of finances, but of culture. I propose rotating departmental oversight, third-party hiring reviews, and a complete firewall between the board and operations for 12 months. The grey vest man scoffed. "You want to govern by paranoia?" "No," she said, "by reality. We were nearly sunk by a woman with a clipboard and a good memory. I won't let it happen again." "What's to stop another one?" "Platinum," Hare asked. This time I chimed in. "Knowing it'll be noticed, that's what stops it. Paranoia doesn't scare people off. Visibility does." There were nods. One man, a financial officer from marketing if I remembered correctly, leaned forward. "I support it," he said. "But I want to know one thing." "Yes?" "Did Bramble plan to kill Carl all along, or did he just see an opening?" Wolfe spoke again. Mr. Bramble lacked the stomach for direct violence, but he had the intellect for orchestration. He anticipated Miss Dent's instability, and he enabled it. Whether he intended murder is irrelevant. He engineered conditions for it to occur. That, in my estimation, is more dangerous. Eloise nodded. "Leon Bramble will not be returning, nor will anyone who had knowledge of the sabotage and said nothing." By the end of the hour, the board voted to approve her plan. 6-1. Platinum Hare abstained. She wasn't ready to oppose, but not yet brave enough to support. That was fine by Eloise. She knew the rest would follow when results arrived. After the meeting, she walked me to the elevator. "You were right," she said. "They respond to certainty even when they pretend not to." "That's Wolfe's charm," I said. "You don't have to agree with him to believe him." She laughed lightly. "Do you?" I grinned. "I just know when not to argue." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was finishing a bowl of Fritz's leek soup and reading a monograph on Chinese hybrid orchids. "You like her," I said, dropping into the chair. "Miss Debray is competent," he said. "That is sufficient." She turned a crisis into an opportunity. "That's rare." "She survived a disaster," Wolfe said. "Now we shall see if she thrives." I leaned back. "You ever wonder what Carl Weems would have done if he'd lived?" "No," Wolfe said. "He was already dying. He simply didn't know it." "From what?" "Obsolescence," Wolfe said. "The most fatal condition in business." We sat in silence a while longer. "Fritz is making apple strudel for dessert," I said. "And yes, I checked, no syrup." "Good," Wolfe murmured. "I am not yet reconciled with sugar." It was a quiet Thursday when the last piece fell into place. We'd wrapped up our involvement in the Debray case, at least in the official sense. Wolfe had declined 2 radio interviews, a panel invitation for corporate ethics in modern food enterprises, and a $500,000 offer to license his likeness for a crime-solving breakfast mascot. That last one nearly gave him a hernia. But just when I thought we'd closed the case file for good, the phone rang. Not the house line, my line. And not just any call. This one came from Saul Panzer, which meant it wasn't idle. I answered. "Talk to me." "I finished combing through the secondary batch records," he said. "You told me to dig. I dug." This was 2 days after Wolfe had said, "We are concluded." I'd asked Saul to keep scratching anyway. "What did you find?" I asked. "A ghost batch," Saul said. That got my attention. "Elaborate." 2 days before Carl Weems died, A small batch of cranberry syrup was prepared and logged under a defunct internal code, one that hasn't been in use since last quarter. It was listed as a test run for a holiday variant, but the strange part is the entire batch was accounted for, consumed and discarded, on paper. On paper, I repeated. Right, Saul said, but there's no physical record, no disposal, no kitchen log, no tasting notes, no prep observation from Nora or Bramble. It's as if it existed just to pad the records. And when was the actual batch that killed Carl made? Day before the incident, marked as standard prep, but in a different fridge with adjusted sweetener, I swore under my breath. So someone made a phantom batch to cover their tracks. That's what it looks like. I hung up and headed straight for the office. Wolfe was reading, of course, The Botany of Orchids, a comparative study, but I didn't wait for his invitation. Ghost batch, I said. Logged, not made. Used to fill in for the poisoned batch in case anyone looked. He looked up. And? Simone Vaughn couldn't have done that. She didn't know syrup prep codes. She never worked kitchen side. No, Wolfe said, she didn't. So who did? Wolfe's eyes closed, and he exhaled slowly. Only one person had both the access to the batch logs and the foresight to create a preemptive alibi. Leon Bramble. Wolfe opened his eyes again. Yes. You said he didn't commit the act, that he merely manipulated Dent and Nora. I did, Wolfe said, but it appears he hedged his bets. The phantom batch proves he was more than an instigator. He expected that someone would search the logs. He covered his own tracks in advance. Which means, Wolfe said, that even if Miss Dent hadn't acted, Mr. Bramble had a second plan. I stood still for a moment, watching Wolfe's face. That changes things, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. Now it is murder, with full intent and premeditation. We didn't call the police yet. Wolfe wanted something more substantial, something that would withstand Bramble's inevitable denial and the legal gymnastics of a man used to dodging responsibility like potholes. So I called in a favor. Saul returned to the 24th Street kitchen with a technician and a forensic data tool one used to recover deleted timestamps from digital logs. The internal prep terminals kept backups even when erased. After an hour he called again. Got it, he said. Leon accessed the batch records at 10:38 p.m. the night before the ghost batch was logged, edited the header line, created the entry and assigned it to a non-existent intern named Jay Wheeler. Who doesn't exist, I said. Correct? No such employee, no hiring record, no ID. Then we're done, I said. No, Wolfe said when I returned and relayed the information. We begin. The next day, Wolfe had me arrange a private conversation. Not a dramatic boardroom. Reveal this time, just a one-on-one. Me, Bramble, Wolfe, and the truth. He arrived exactly on time, still stylish but not as polished. His tie was wrinkled, his coat slightly dusty. He sat. Wolfe didn't ask if he wanted coffee. You know why? You're here, Wolfe said. I assume this is another retrospective lecture, Bramble replied. Should I take notes? No, Wolfe said. You should listen. You have committed a crime, Mr. Bramble, not only the manipulation of a murder, but the full orchestration of it. You intended to kill Carl Weems from the beginning. The use of Merrill Dent was convenient, but not essential. If she had failed, you would have proceeded without her. That's ridiculous. You created a ghost batch, Wolfe continued. Logged it, then deleted the evidence. You fabricated an employee, you placed the poison yourself, likely while Nora was momentarily distracted. I never. You wrote the note that guided her to the wrong fridge. You knew the syrup would settle. You designed the variables. You didn't respond to chaos. You built it. Leon's face remained still. Then a slow, faint smile. You can't prove it in court. No, Wolfe said, but the DA can. You have no motive. I have every motive, Wolfe said. Control, revenge, vindication. Carl dismissed you, insulted your methods, undermined your recipes. You knew the board would hesitate to promote you, but eliminate Carl, implicate his assistant, and sabotage the chain's reputation while painting yourself as a stabilizing creative force. You walk out with sympathy and a book deal. Leon stood. I think I'll be leaving. Not yet, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin? I stepped between him and the door. I've just placed a call, I said. Police are on their way, and Saul delivered the backup log to the DA's office this morning. Leon looked at me, then at Wolfe. You don't win, you know, he said quietly. You preserve. That's all you ever do. Wolfe blinked once. That is sufficient. When the door closed behind Bramble and his escort, Wolfe sat back and reached for his beer. That night, over a dinner of herb-stuffed guinea hen and tarragon juice, Wolfe was calmer than I'd seen him in weeks. The orchids had been watered, the office aired, the case concluded. Do you think he regrets it? I asked. No, Wolfe said. Mr. Bramble believes he deserved the outcome. Regret does not live in men like him. Only resentment. And Simone? She regrets being outplayed. And Merrill? She regrets everything. I nodded. It's strange, I said, how many people it takes to kill one man. No, Wolfe said. It only takes one. The rest are accomplices. He finished his beer, folded his napkin, and looked at the empty plate. Fritz has made poached pears for dessert, he said, with cinnamon. Wolfe's brow twitched. Of course not. I stood. Then justice truly is served. The morning after Leon Bramble's arrest, the brownstone resumed its default setting. Silent, methodical, and precisely resistant to anything resembling change. Fritz prepared a breakfast of soft-boiled eggs, toasted brioche, and unsweetened tea, just in case Wolfe's trust in sweeteners hadn't quite returned. I read the papers. Wolfe ignored them. The Gazette's headline read, Poisoned Ambition, Celebrity Chef Charged in Corporate Murder Plot. Under it, a black and white photo of Leon Bramble in cuffs, coat flapping behind him like the broken wings of a fallen archangel. Wolfe didn't so much as grunt. He was halfway through the Orchid Journal when I finally broke the silence. You know, I said, if I didn't know better, I'd say you actually enjoyed this one. He didn't look up. Enjoyment implies entertainment. This was an infestation. Of what? Pride. The self-anointed kind. Still, I said, not every day we get a triple-layer crime with a garnish of corporate sabotage. Wolfe reached for his beer and sipped. Then finally he set the Orchid Journal aside. It began, he said, as a vendetta disguised as indignation. Merrill Dent's resentment was real, but it was inflamed, curated. Simone Vaughn saw her as a tool. Leon Bramble saw her as a fuse. And Carl Weems, arrogant, inattentive, careless, was the powder keg. He paused, considering. It is often said, he continued, that businesses are machines. I disagree. They are terrariums, small ecosystems held in glass. When one element turns toxic, the entire balance shifts, slowly, then violently. You still think Carl's death was inevitable? No, he said. It was facilitated. He stood and moved to the Globe bar, poured himself a cognac, very rare before noon, and stared for a moment at the amber liquid as if weighing its chemistry. I did not like Carl Weems, he said, but I disliked more the ease with which his life was offered up for gain. Miss Dent wanted respect. Miss Vaughn wanted leverage. Mr. Bramble wanted a narrative in which he could play the misunderstood genius. Each had motive. Each saw a gap in the structure and moved through it. And yet, I said, none of them swung the axe. No, Wolfe said. They merely carved the handle. We sat in silence for a while after that. I watched him, finish the cognac in 3 measured sips, then return to his chair like a man who'd trimmed an overgrown branch and restored balance to the garden. The phone rang at 11:10. It was Eloise Debray. I won't keep you long, she said, But I thought you should know we've restructured. Every person who had a hand in that disaster is gone. And for the first time, the board asked me what to do. You told them? I asked. I told them to wait, that I'd call you first. I passed the receiver to Wolfe. He took it without a word. Yes, Miss Debray, he said. I'm listening. He listened for a while, then, no, I do not accept retainers, I accept problems. A pause. Very well. If one arises, you may call again. He handed me the phone. She wanted to formalize the relationship, he said. Into what? Breakfast crime consulting? He didn't reply. He had already picked up his book again. That evening, Fritz tried once more. He brought out a dessert of baked apples with a caramel drizzle. Wolfe gave it a long look. He sniffed, forked a slice, and tasted it. Then quietly, acceptable. I leaned back, content. The brownstone had survived another storm. Wolfe had preserved order. Justice had been served, cold, tart, and with just a trace of sweetness. As I got up to pour the coffee, I paused at the sideboard and said, You know, I've been thinking, if we ever open our own place, we could call it the Justice Cafe. Tagline, where every breakfast ends with the truth. Wolfe made a sound that might have been a suppressed groan. I will permit you, he said, to be murdered first. I grinned. Fair enough.